So I went snowboarding for a week in Utah, and then I went to Brazil for another week. I came back, and there was a React conference that happened. It was pretty nice.
Nice. Maybe you should go away more often.
Yeah, we were lots to catch up on. Obviously, it's been a while since we've done this, but I moved. We don't have our office anymore. This place looks like a disaster right now, which is great for my anxiety. But no, we have a lot of plans for the office here in the new apartment. There's like a whole room we have dedicated here. Should be good for videos. Might even paint like a wall black. Get some like neon Mario and Bowser. You know, have we discussed this plan yet?
No, we have not.
No.
I think I'm in though.
Yeah, all right. Lightsabers, things like that. Big old whiteboard. But yeah, been lots of moves, lots of changes. You've been sick for like 90% of the last 6 months. So we've just been giving ourselves a little break here. But lots been going on, actually. And we've just been hacking on lots of fun side projects. We haven't been doing consulting work for a while. And I launched a Tailwind course.
Yeah.
So we can talk about all that stuff.
Let's talk about the Tailwind course.
Let's do it. I want to make a little teaser for my YouTube channel, just to talk about it. But if you're listening to this, you'll have access to it. It's December 16th. We're recording this. And Egghead is doing like a December Advent kind of thing where they release a course every day, and they're all free for the month. So you got 2 weeks to go watch it. It's about 2.5 hours of content. And yeah, it's like my flagship like Tailwind course for them. And yeah.
Do you have to do anything? You just go to Egghead.io to get it?
Yeah, I think we'll put a link up in the description for this podcast. But you might have to sign up and give your email or something like that. But other than that, it's free.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's about 2.5 hours long. And I want it to be a little different from just your normal, like, here's how you used color utilities. Here's how you use, Flexbox utilities. And instead try to make it a little bit of a different angle from a lot of courses that are out there, even ones I've done in the past, where we actually go through and build Discord clone in the course. So I think that makes it a little more fun and exciting. Everyone knows Discord. And when you're building a real app like that, you run into things that you wouldn't maybe think about. The details are where the complexity is really, instead of like just a whipped up demo app that's like overly simplified. So a lot of little hover interactions in the sidebar channel, making it dynamic using React components to separate things apart. So yeah, I had a lot of fun making it. And again, put a link up and would love to hear what people have to say about it.
Yeah, one of the things I loved about this was as you were doing it, you would alt-tab between your project that you're building this in and the real Discord. And it's pixel perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't tell.
Yeah.
Like everything, like the circles, like every little piece of fonts all lined up.
Yeah,
I think that really shows like the power of Tailwind, how you can customize it. And watching you build an app like that, I think it's awesome.
It's fun. Yeah. I mean, I think other than like the headless UI website, we hadn't ever really done something like that where it's like, it has to be pixel perfect. Because Tailwind is so fun to just use the default scales and stuff and just get things looking good on your own. But to match it point for point, is like you said, it really testament to being able to customize Tailwind as much as you want. And obviously the just-in-time stuff helps. Tailwind 3 just came out too. I really do need to go on vacation more often. It's like the best way to advance web technology, I think.
On that, I upgraded one of my apps to Tailwind 3.
Oh, nice.
And it's one of those things where like, I knew it was going to be fast.
Yeah.
Like I knew it wasn't going to take like weeks to do, but I was even still surprised at how fast it went.
That's cool.
Yeah. They have a great, upgrade guide where you just scroll through and it's like some grays changed. Some like, I think emerald is green or green is emerald, something like that. But it was very easy for me to Command F, am I using this utility? Command Shift F, search my whole project for the utility. Am I using it? Okay, what do I need to change it to?
Nice.
It took about like, I want to say like 12, 15 minutes.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great. The JIT stuff is all just
in there
time.
By default. You don't have to mode JIT it or anything. It doesn't have a warning message that's maybe not supported or whatever.
Yeah, and there's a lot of new stuff that I just haven't even used. Like,
I know. There's so much.
Like it seems like it's so much more powerful.
Yeah.
And,
it's like hard to keep up with all this stuff.
Yeah. So I should say like I upgraded. And I think we have some like plugins and those just upgraded.
Yep. Isn't the forums thing in there by default now?
So that was actually a question that I want to ask you. Like I think in the upgrade guide, it said like if you're using these plugins, just make sure you're on the latest version. and I did, and I didn't remove them.
And those Tailwind forms.
We have like Tailwind forms,
typography,
and aspect ratio, and typography. So I just upgraded those, and everything worked.
Nice. In the front and first website, or
yep,
nice.
Yep.
I think the aspect ratio might be in there now.
I think it might be too, but yeah. It was basically I read a section, did what it said, and then moved on. And by read a section, I mean skimmed it for
the code snippet.
For the code snippets. Yeah. But yeah, it made me think that like, definitely if I was working on a bigger project, I would want something like Percy to do like a pixel perfect.
Yep.
And not like, it's probably something where I would just set up Percy for like just this PR. Like I wouldn't, because we've used Percy and we like it.
Right.
But sometimes like someone makes like a content change and your test fails. So I might just set up Percy. If we had a big app and we were doing this in,
right.
I think I would set up Percy, get a snapshot, upgrade to Tailwind
of like
3.
all the pages. Like we did that with Mirage site.
With Mirage,
I think.
Yep. But the Mirage site content changes trigger it. Right. So it's like, sometimes they fail, and then I feel bad. Someone opens a PR and it fails, and I'm like, no, this isn't a failure.
Yeah.
I think it would be worth using a tool like Percy just to make sure. But I haven't noticed any problems since following the instructions. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I was glad to see. I just skimmed through it a little bit, but I was glad to see that all the colors are in there by default. Because I would always use I would also have to figure out the default one is too blue. I want this other one.
Yep.
And now they have like slate and all that stuff.
Yeah,
it's pretty sweet.
They have a ton of colors. Yeah, they have like the grays. There's like 10 grays, and they're all there. It's like warm gray, cool gray,
slate, coal, or whatever, or something like that. Yeah,
so it's really awesome. It's really cool.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. And then React Conf, I haven't really had a chance to look at all the talks yet, but I did watch the keynote on my first class flight home. Which, by the way, if you've never flown first class international, man, if you want a reason to work hard, that is one of them right there. Full incline. I mean, 6'5" of man right here, laying down flat on an airplane is quite a marvel of human engineering. But that was amazing. But fell asleep with a whiskey and Coke in my hand watching the React Conf talk, and it was pretty awesome. The Suspense stuff was most interesting. We were talking about that earlier, and I know we were talking about Suspense a couple weeks ago, and I've been playing around with it. But I really like the way they laid out the problem and solved the motivating problem. Because, we were talking about this earlier, but there's a lot of angles you can go about how to talk about Suspense and why it exists and why it's being worked on, or why it doesn't exist yet, but why it's being worked on. There's this whole how can we eliminate async code from our mental model, from our components? How can we do data fetching easier? How can we use fewer effects in our components? But the way they focused, the one they focused on in the keynote was this idea of keeping your components easy to read from top to bottom.
Yeah.
And that is what kind of got our gears turning the most.
It's fun because you can start with that, and then you can start what was the one talk about a counter and a button that increments a counter. That's just top to bottom, simplest component. Even if you don't know React, you can look at that component and get what it does.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I want to make a YouTube video about this, and I want to try to give it my own twist. And that seemed like the easiest way to kind of talk it out in my head. So the idea here is if you are learning React, once you get to props and state, basically state is half of React, right? If there's no state, there's no React basically, because there's no re-rendering, because there's props you pass in, but that's someone else's state. And if it's not, it doesn't change over time, and you have nothing to react to.
It'd be pretty awesome to just make a stateless React app.
Yeah.
You have
one
no
screen, no interaction. So state is obviously very fundamental to React. And so when you get to the point in React where you've learned the JSX and you've learned, how props work, you usually build something like a counter. And a counter is really easy because it's isolated, and but you can understand the whole thing. So you set up some state, count state. You start off at 0. You render a p tag that shows the current value of count, and then you render a button that when you click on it, it adds +1. So call set state count +1, something like that. So you have an event handler, And you have state, which changes over time. Every time you change the state, the component re-renders, and it shows the new version of the new value of counter. This component is like a quintessential React component because it's like the data is immutable. You're getting like re-renders that are independent from each other. It can be re-rendered as many times as it needs to be, and it'll be the same thing. So it's pure,
Even if like count doesn't change or anything.
Exactly.
You can just re-render.
Exactly. And the whole thing is synchronous in the sense that when you render from top to bottom, it's just one literally a function call. I mean, React components are literally functions, but it's also, even though every React component is literally a function, this one is truly a function from the programmer's mental model. So when you're looking at it, it's just running code top to bottom.
Yeah, you can put console.logs or debuggers at any point.
And you'll be predictably able to know where they log, as opposed to async code where sometimes you put console logs and it's confusing about which one would run first or second. So then they go in to explain, well, once you add something async like data fetching with like a use effect, use effect, fetch data, then set state, you've lost this ability to read the component from top to bottom. And let's say your component takes in a prop, which,
Can I just stop you here? It's actually really confusing. Like you kind of have to know React at this point.
You have to know so much about the details.
You read the component and you hit a use effect, and there's like something that just goes onto a queue in your head, a stack in your head that's like, okay, once I get to the bottom, I know I have to come back and read this use effect.
Dude, what about when there's like 3 use effects?
Yeah.
In projects we've worked on or other people's code you've opened, and there's like multiple use effects setting up auth state or something. You could know React very well, and you would have no idea when things run. Which one runs first. And then there's like this. They mentioned batching too. If you have an event handler, and you say set count, set color, set this in 3 different lines, React batches that. So when you click, it's only one re-render and you get all the new values. But in an effect, that's not true. It actually triggers 3 re-renders. In React 18, it batches them in effects. But right now, today, it doesn't.
So fun. I mean, this is just, I've been writing React for
multiple years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Did not know that.
I know. So they make this really nice point that's like React being able to simplify our code and having the set state just trigger a full re-render so you can read the function, as opposed to like the jQuery days where you have to like do this and then call .open. And then you've already introduced like the go-to confusing indirection. And with just a synchronous component like a counter, you have no indirection. It's all top to bottom. As soon as you add data fetching, like use query somewhere, you have this jump. You jump over. Now you get the first render. There's no data, so you have like a loading spinner, or you have like a load or whatever. And then the effect runs off, and then you re-render again. And so now you have it, and you go. But then, like, what if while the then callback is running, the props change? Well, props changing triggers a re-render too. So now what's going to happen? You lose this very quickly in terms of a simple mental model.
Yep. By the way, when you were describing that, you said you use query, but we're not there yet.
Right.
You're just
use
saying
effect.
Use effect.
Yeah. So you have a use effect, and the props change, and then you have to jump back around this use effect.
I mean, you have to I'm in the .then of the effect.
Yeah.
Do I have the same props?
Yeah.
Like, okay, do the props change?
Yeah.
Is this data related to the props? Like a lot of bookkeeping.
A lot of bookkeeping. Then they say, well, most people don't write up a plain old use effect like this. And we use data fetching libraries, which are a lot better, which is true. Use query or use SWR or use data as like a generic example. So then he shows the code where you have a use data and it gives you back a data and it is loading. And you've kind of regained some of this top to bottomness of a simple function, a synchronous component, like a counter.
I think you have.
You basically have.
Yeah.
You basically have. So now your component's top to bottom, and if the hook changes, then you rerun it top to bottom, but that's fine.
And if like the data that you're using in your use query, like if you're using an ID from a prop in your use query and that prop changes, like that like is loading is going to flip back to true.
Right.
And data would be like null at this point, or like whatever data. Yeah, it would probably be null.
Yeah. But no, it is true. You've totally this is actually an important point. You've totally gone back to top down, which is why hooks are so great. Yeah. And you just have to you have different states, but you also have different states for a normal state variable that can change. And you have to think about what if the count is 0 or 1 or 2. Now you think about if the data is undefined or a list of 3 people or a list of 100, that's fine. And then is loading true or false. So you still have all the states there, but now hooks give you back this kind of top-down thing, which is why like our favorite React code is the one that doesn't use an effect, because there's a hook that keeps the details like that encapsulated. You don't slip into having to understand the order of things. And it just is a lot cleaner.
Yeah.
So then it's like, well, what problems do we still have? And there's a few of them. And I think just kind of thinking about this out loud, but I think this is the way I want to think about how to explain this. Let's say you have a component that fetches a list of people, and you have a parent that has, let's just do like an inbox. And you have an inbox. So on the sidebar, you have all the messages. And then in the middle, it says choose a message. So your parent app is rendering like a sidebar and an image viewer, like a message viewer, right? Mm-hmm. So it renders the sidebar, and the sidebar has code that is like fetching use query / messages, right? And while that use query is running and is loading is true, it can render a loading spinner, right? And that can be okay. Sometimes as you're building these apps, you start off with like a flex layout is like collapsed, and then you render this thing and it starts off like this, and then the messages pop in and it gives you like a flash of unstyled content because like the content's changing. Mm-hmm. Anyways, it happens pretty quickly that you run into a situation where the parent app actually wants to control what's happening while that sidebar is loading.
Yeah, I think like maybe a good example with going off your inbox thing is like you have the list of messages, but then you're also like you've clicked a message, and you're displaying.
Yeah, I was trying to work up to that, but maybe that's the way to start.
You know, this is fine. We've kind of been talking about this all day, but there's like kind of like a big leap here, but maybe we can like do the leap and then work backwards.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you start off, you say, okay, so you have a sidebar. It loads the list of messages, and while it's loading, it shows a loading spinner.
Yep.
And that's fine. And that works great. And your sidebar message list resembles the counter component because it's encapsulated. It has all of the concerns. If you want to know about where these messages are coming from, you open up the message list. It says use query. It works. When it's loading, it says is loading is true. So you return a spinner. Boom, everything works great. Okay, so no problem so far. Hooks have solved that problem. Boom, you're good. Now you click on a message, you render the message viewer, the message component, and you give it a message ID. It loads the full message instead of just the preview. And let's say while it's loading, it renders a loading spinner, and then it shows the message. Mm-hmm. Good to go. Now you refresh the app. That's the thing.
Bingo. Yep.
So you refresh the app, and on the initial render, you're on /messages/1. So what's going to happen here? The sidebar is going to render a loading spinner for the messages, and the message component is going to render a loading spinner for the individual message, right? There's another way another thing that could happen here is you could even be on the initial 0 state, and it says, please select a message in the middle, but your messages are loading. So that's kind of weird too.
Yeah.
So in both of those cases, it's totally reasonable for the parent app, the person who is rendering these components, to want more control over the state of the UI while those things are not ready yet.
Yeah, like listen, I haven't loaded my list of messages, and I haven't loaded the single message you're trying to view yet.
I don't want to show anything.
I don't want to show 2 loading spinners and then have them like one flash in while the other's still going.
Exactly.
It's like, which loading spinner should the user look at?
Exactly.
So you're like, I just want to load a single loading spinner, and so what do we do in React?
Or I want to show a splash screen, you know?
Yeah.
Or I want to hide something, or basically it's like we were trying to understand this because like if you have a counter, or like let's say we were thinking of like a calculator, which is like fully synchronous code. You could imagine it completely. It's a stateful component, but it's completely encapsulated. You tell your team like I need a calculator for this part of the screen. They give it to you. Me as the parent, I can render this calculator component anywhere, and you can tell me exactly what it's going to look like at every stage, and it's going to be ready as soon as I render it. When I angle bracket that calculator, it's going to be in exactly the state I expect it to be. and it's going to be ready to go. And so there's nothing you need to do as the author of Calculator to prepare me to render it. I can just tell you exactly what's going to happen. But with a component that is like an asynchronous component that loads data, it can be in this awkward state, not only because it's rendering a loading spinner and it doesn't know what data it's getting back, but because you don't know how long that's going to take. Maybe the network request takes a long time. Maybe it fails. It's basically like when you add these asynchronicity into a component and you add something that depends on the network, you very quickly get to a situation where the parent wants more control over how that thing is displayed.
Yep.
That's one way to think. I think there's like a better way to say that, but it's like, because we were having this back and forth with like a hypothetical argument, and it's like, I'm kind of like going all over the place.
Yeah.
Here.
I think the thing here is actually, let's finish the message example, and then we'll come back. Cause I think you take the big leap to the harder example and then you fill in the details. So basically,
so you see the two loading spinners on the initial render at the ID.
And I say to you, like, look, if like as a product manager, if one of those things is loading, we just want to see one loading spinner.
Exactly.
So like React has an answer for this. I mean, what is it?
So today, what you would do if you wanted to accomplish this was you would hoist the data loading up from the two sibling components to the parent. And that seems like it makes a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense. The parent...
This is how we've been trained for years as React developers. Parent needs something, hoist it up.
Exactly. So you hoist the data fetching from the two components into the parent. Now the parent can either fetch them in one call, like as if it were, if you could do it with GraphQL, where you can just literally slot them together. You could do that. Mm-hmm. And we've done that before. Components export like they're like queries, and then the parent just like slots them in and makes one big GraphQL request. And then once it's loaded, it passes them back down. Now the parent is fetching all the data for its children,
but can I just
renders a single spinner. And then once all of those requests, either that big aggregate request is done, or a bunch of different requests, those are all done. It can then render the children, because now the children are ready. They have their data dependencies ready to go. And that works. But you've broken this idea of having these encapsulated components from a perspective of the way you could open that calculator component or the counter component and see everything about what that thing is rendering. Now you're opening this message list component, and all of a sudden it like doesn't have state anymore. It might have like the selected message, but like you open it and like where are the messages coming from? Well, they're coming from the parent. And then you open the message and it's like, where's the selected message coming from? And it's being passed in from the parent. Then you add like a chat box as a third component down here, and you have to reopen the parent component, make sure you put the new data requirements there and do it. So this is like, give me a calculator, give me a color picker, give me a counter, and I can just render it and it works. That's like the beautiful idea behind, like, that's like a quintessentially good React component. But if you give me a component and then also give me some function I have to run before I can render it, that sucks.
That's really, I think that's the point you're trying to make with your calculator. Yeah, I can just give you a component, you can render it. But if I give you a component, and here's the data that you need to pass to this component, and here's how you get that data. You run this GraphQL query.
You're done. You've broken the model. It's a different way to do it. If I give you a message list component and say you can just render it, because I'm a smart message list component and I'm fetching my own data, the problem with that is like, well, until I'm ready, I'm going to give you a loading spinner, and then you can say, well, that's not what I want. So that's why it exists. The distinction exists. Yep. You could give me a calculator with like an empty state that says like 0, like enter a number, and but that's the state of the calculator. If you give me a message list without data, there's something different about that. The loading spinner is not just another state of the message list. The loading indicator, the loading spinner, is like an admission that this component is not ready to actually show anything valuable to the user yet. That's like the difference. And 0 messages is it's UI. Like, exactly. 0 messages in the inbox is UI. A loading spinner is not UI. It's not like UI. It's not anything. It's not why the user is there in your app.
This is really hard. Like, I totally agree with this, but again, we've been talking about this all day. And this is kind of hard to grasp because you think something like, let data, comma, is loading equals use query.
Right.
That makes sense. Right. Use query is going to know if it's loading or not. So you think those two things live together.
This is the thing, though. Maybe this is one way to say it. A loading spinner is an intermediate state. It's a transitional state. It's never an end state. Calculator doesn't have a transitional state when it first renders. And neither does a counter or anything like a color picker. It's a loading spinner is it's an intermediate state. And it doesn't stay there forever. You would never render a loading spinner forever. And you don't have to.
You haven't seen my apps.
And you're not waiting for the user to take any action. Yeah. You're literally rendering a placeholder. It's literally called placeholder because you are waiting on something to happen. Like you're waiting for, that's why when they say like the component is ready, like it's not ready yet. It means something different than like, oh, it just has an empty state.
It's really good.
It's very
not the zero
different.
State. Yep.
Empty state and error state are very different from loading states.
Yeah.
But like we think of all those things as the same. You like run a use query and like, what is the state of the promise? Is it pending? Is it fulfilled? Is it rejected? And then you're like, is there data? Is there empty? And we're like, all those are the same things. Loading is different. Loading is special because loading is on the way. It's a transition. It's on the way to being in a terminal state, but it's not terminal itself. So because of this unique aspect of loading, you very quickly run in these situations where it's totally reasonable for the parent to want to decide what to do when you're in the intermediate state. And like this changes too. Like when in my app, which resembles the inbox, on the first render, when you're loading all the messages and the selected message, if you're on a URL, you want to show a single loader for the whole thing or effectively a splash screen. But then once you render the inbox and you start clicking around, you actually want more granular loading states because you have the message. So if you just click the thing and then you show the whole spinner again, you don't want to do that.
Yep.
So what you do is you insert intermediate loading states, right? And so maybe that's one way to think about it. Is like loading is like this intermediate state, and it brings about the situation where you need more control over how to display components that are in an intermediate pending state.
It's really interesting. I love this. And when you only have one component that's loading, that's like the intermediate state can kind of be handled by that component because it's the only component.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to it's not concerned about any other components. But as soon as you add a second data loading component, like the inbox, now you have two spinners, two components that are concerned with data loading, and they actually like.
How much can they do on their own? They don't know their context. They don't know what else is happening in the app. The best they can do is render like a spinner.
No, you end up making like all these callbacks where you like register like on did load data and fire some and set some state on the parent. And like, come on, every time we've done this, it's just it's a mess.
It's a mess. Yeah. So today the way you solve this is hoist the data loading and data fetching up, and then you pass it down. And this really breaks this model because these components now are like dumb components. And if you want to tweak something in them, then you are like looking for where in the ancestor tree the actual query is being made. You know, another thing we said this reminds us of is like writing controller code in either Rails or even in Ember, where you enter a route, it enters through a controller. The controller is marshaling the data. They used to say marshaling the data that's needed to display the minimum meaningful screen for that route. And then it hands it off. You do this in Rails and you do this in Ember and you do this in like traditional MVC. And like that always had this problem too, where like we did this on Ember Map a lot, where we would like add data. We added like the viewed. Remember we added like whether you had watched a lesson.
Yep.
And you had a green check if you did. And there's like two ways in that route, remember? Because one is on initial load of a video series. And then another is if you transition, you already have the series loaded. And we had this issue where we had to hoist the data loading so that it could render initially and it wouldn't have all these different loaders. And it was just a mess. You'd rather just open up the video list and have the video list just have all of the logic for rendering the video list, including whether or not the current user has watched an episode or not.
Yeah.
So hoisting the data loading is how you solve this problem today, but it creates all these problems. So you basically are stuck in these two worlds. One, you keep your components smart and encapsulated, which is like the preferred way because the same reason is preferred for the calculator. You have all the logic there that's related to it. But then you sacrifice the UX. Or you hoist the data loading for a better UX, but you've broken the encapsulation of your data fetching components, and that's a bummer too.
And
if you add another data fetching component, you have to go back. So the encapsulation is broken. Like you just have you have the data. What data is being fetched is the concern of the component, and you want it there. But when you hoist it, it's out.
Yeah, and like I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes like if I find myself writing a component that's like, data fetching component, it's just supposed to fetch like comments and posts and users, and then just supply those to its children. That's like it's
dead. It's just like, why is this here?
Why am I naming this thing?
Yeah.
What do I name this thing?
It's an implicit coupling between these components.
Well, so like kind of moving this forward,
right.
What we really want is we want to keep the data in the child, but we want the loading hoisted.
Yeah.
So we could like, if you use like Apollo has like a cache.
Mm-hmm.
So you could do something like use query in the parent and then the same use query in the child. I guess that's like, but then I'm telling you, in order to render this component, you've got to paste this query into it. So we're back to that.
You're back to that. So this is like the beautiful effing idea about Suspense, which is so cool, is that it makes this explicit, and it actually pulls apart the loading from the data reading. And it's like, again, never had thought about those two really being separate things, but this idea of like, I'm not ready yet. I still think there's like a better way to say that because it doesn't quite get at the kernel. Like I think what we were just dancing around it a little bit, but this idea that like I have data requirements, the fact that they're async is actually like, it's like a separate concern. The fact that what I need to render is like needs network access is like actually a separate idea from the idea of that I need this shape of data from the server.
Yeah.
And so what Suspense does is it lets you do that. It lets you pull those two concerns apart. Because again, loading is different, pending is different from error, fulfilled, all these other things.
Can you just describe like how it does
and
that?
So the way it does this is through the whole promise throwing thing where, when you render a component that hits a use query that's using Suspense, it is able to say, I need this query and I'm fetching it, but right now I don't have it yet. So that is a way to directly tell your parent, I'm in a loading state. So now we have a way through React to tell the parent we're in a loading state. The message list is fetching the messages and the message is fetching the current message. But you kick the decision up to the parent app and he gets to say, all right, while these things are not ready, here's what I'm going to do. And so just that difference now without hoisting the data fetching up. And that's the key. When you read that document in the React guides, that's Thinking in React by Pete Hunt, he talks about hoisting state to the lowest common ancestor. And the idea there is like when you have count over here and count over here, but you want them to be the same, you hoist the state up and share it. That is still the best way to do it and the right and correct way to think about shared data because you want a single source of truth everywhere. When we hoist data fetching just for the sake of loading states, we're not solving that problem at all. So sometimes it feels like maybe that's like a Reacty way to do it, but really this is making it crystal clear it's not.
It absolutely feels like a Reacty way, but yes.
It's not.
But by the way,
because you're breaking encapsulate. Also, it just sucks. Like if you write this kind of code, you're just like, this is annoying and a lot of indirection. And where does the data come? Oh, there's an effect up here that's rerendering. You're all over the place. Yeah. So it's like it's Reacty in one sense because it's the only way we've been able to do it so far. But it's very not Reacty in another sense because it doesn't feel like working in those beautiful stateless or not stateless, but encapsulated components that don't have the external dependencies.
So I just want to I want to try to answer. You said I didn't like the way you described this.
Yeah.
If I think about a calculator, like when my calculator is in its zero state, I know the calculator can describe that zero state. No matter where it's rendered, it doesn't matter. When the calculator is has 100 numbers in it, it can describe that state within the calculator. Where it's rendered doesn't matter.
Right.
So when you're in a loading state, you actually the calculator or the message list in this case can't actually describe the loading state because how it's rendered matters.
Right.
And so that's why your components, they can't show a loading spinner because that's why it's really up to the parent because the context in which you're rendered matters. So the loading state, again, this is what you said, but the being like a transition state, I think is a really good way to say it.
Right.
And it's a really good way to say it.
Right.
And that is not up to the component. The component can't describe
exactly. It's going to move to some other state, not because the user has interacted with it or asked for something. It's going to move to another state because it literally wasn't ready to render yet.
Yeah, and it doesn't know how it's being rendered. The parent's responsible for rendering it, and therefore the loading is the parent's responsibility. Loading, you can't say like when I have a message list that's loading, it should show a loading spinner in the middle, because that's not up to the message list. The message list can describe its 0 state, it can describe 100 messages, it can describe one message, it can describe one unread message, but it can't describe its loading state because like, I don't know, how it's rendered matters. Like if you're rendering like, for whatever reason, rendering 3 message lists on the screen.
It's just not the concern. It's just not, you're right. It's not like the calculator gets to decide what it looks like when there's no numbers entered. But the message list can't decide what it looks like when it's not ready to be rendered yet. Right. Because by definition, it's not ready. It's not, yeah. You know, it's something like that. And also, like, well, what you're saying kind of makes sense too, because the context changes too. Like if the message list is loading on the initial render of the app versus if the message list is loading and a subsequent navigation, right? Same with the message viewer, like that example earlier where the suspense boundaries change. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what you're saying, which is like
I'm saying both. Yeah, I'm saying that like when you're loading, you would think like, oh, if this is loading, I can describe my own state. Right, it's a loading spinner, but you actually can't because you don't know how you're being loaded. You don't know if there's like 3 message lists on the screen. Like maybe I'm making like a shared inbox where I can see like your inbox and my
but
inbox.
I think there's even if you know that there's only one version of it and exactly where it's going, there's something else that's like.
But you don't, because you don't know if your sibling component is also loading data. Yeah. And that's what I mean by the context. Yeah. Maybe like the environment is a better way to describe like this.
Yeah. But yeah, the context changes, and there's a really crisp way to say it I'm sure we'll eventually get to, but it has to do with all of this stuff. But basically, that's kind of the problem Suspense solves. So it makes it really clarifies this fact that a loading state is actually a really fundamentally different part of this, and reading the data is different from not being ready yet. And so what it does is it lets you delegate to your parent that you're not ready yet, while still maintaining that encapsulation, keeping all the data reading logic inside of the component. It's not duplicated anywhere. You don't have to maintain it. But now the parent is, through first-class API and React, able in the JSX to say which subtree is not ready yet, and in that case, what should we fall back to? And it's awesome. And you can add new components in that subtree that have their own data fetching, and it will still preserve that entire thing because, again, the parent's orchestrating it. It's just like it's clear that it's almost easier when you just work with it and see it, why this is so clearly a concern of the parent, you know?
Yeah. I want to go through like all my apps and like any state that's like any conditional that's like is loading, is setting up, is initializing. Yeah. Like I just want to be like, that's not like, this is not your responsibility.
Yeah,
this
is
your parent.
It is. Yeah.
Just think about like how much code that cleans up.
Yeah.
How much easier it makes like rendering the children.
Yeah. So. You know, another interesting thing is like, imagine you had like a stock picker or something that was like updating every like couple seconds or something. And you do the initial fetch where it renders all of the list of stocks. But then like every 5 seconds it reloads, and by the thing it just says like refreshing. That's not a loading state from this perspective that we're talking about. The stock list can show meaningful UI to the user, which is the stale version of the stock prices. And then by each one it says refreshing, or there's been an event or something like that, and it's reloading. Now we're showing a loading spinner, but it's actual UI for the user. So that makes sense why that would be part of the stock. And if you're rendering from stale cache, but you're still rendering. So that's like interesting because like it's loading in a sense, but it's not because it's it's like a meaningful UI state.
There's something about like you can like describe the transition. Like, I'm going from a list of stocks to a refresh list of stocks. So
but it's also not an intermediate state. It's like we're showing you the last best known value of the stocks, which is like meaningful UI. Loading spinner is like literally meaningless UI. It's like, and in that case, it's really not the concern of the component, it's the concern of the parent. Something like that. It's like, can you show me anything meaningful right now? It's something like that.
I have a question. So say you had like the stock picker components refreshing itself. Mm-hmm. Can you do something that's like, okay, this is going to be weird. I by default like want to just show you that I'm refreshing, but I also want to give the ability to like delegate to my parent that I'm refreshing. I guess that's like
code,
you
could,
but you would be that's like outside of Suspense. That's like code. That
no, you could do that with Suspense.
Okay,
you could re-trigger a Suspense boundary in a parent if you wanted to on refresh. If you didn't want to render from cache, you could do that. You would.
I know you can re-trigger, but could you like basically if there's a Suspense boundary above me, I want it rendered, but if there's not, I just show the refresh. Like I just show like a little message.
I don't think so. I think you would say if I have a value at all, render, otherwise suspend.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Where I'm going with this is like, is there a way you could just by default, I give you a messageless component. It fetches all of its own data. It shows a loading spinner when it's loading, but it also sends a signal out by throwing a promise that lets you.
You're saying if you happen to render you inside of a thing without a Suspense boundary, you'll be able to render
it just like has good defaults of like you would get
you can render it by itself.
Yeah,
you'd still get 2 loading spinners,
right?
Because you're opting into like the parent managing more of the loading states, I guess.
Yeah, so like by default, because like I can describe a loading state, but then if you want it,
right,
you have control
have it. Yeah, that's interesting.
And the key here is you don't have to refactor code.
Right.
You don't have to
exactly.
You don't have to move code around.
Exactly. That's interesting. So, yeah, I guess you would have to like.
I mean, maybe I could make my component like you would pass in a prop that's like, I will handle loading true, and then at that point, I would just like.
You would have to pass in a prop or like context. So use context. You could read some context and see if you're in a tree where there's an ancestor with a Suspense boundary or something like that.
Yeah. Fancy.
Yeah. Anyways, to kind of wrap all that up, so it's really cool, and it's kind of like definitely a thought-provoking way to think about why they're working on Suspense, and just a way of thinking about, you think about in Ember you have loading routes. And it's almost a similar thing where when the route is not ready yet, there's a separate loading template from the template that uses all of the data that you're fetching. And that's kind of like the controller's not ready to render anything meaningful yet. So let's show a loading spinner here.
But can you have 2 sibling routes? I mean,
but I'm saying like it's this idea that like there is it's a validation of the idea that like when things aren't ready to render anything meaningful to the user,
it's somewhere else.
It's you go up the tree to the lowest point and say, okay, well then we can render a skeleton screen here, we can render a loading spinner, and then once things are ready, let it go. And that's the same idea here with this idea that like loading belongs. They say things like loading belongs in the JSX, loading belongs in a parent and an ancestor, and it's like you want to compose it with UI higher up above the components that have data dependencies. The thing with Ember and Rails is like the data dependencies themselves are in the controller, which is annoying because now you have to go to the controller if you want to add like a last name, even though this component down here is what's using last name. Mm-hmm. It'd be great if you could open that component down there, add last name to your query, but then still have the parent know that you're fetching something, and that's exactly what Suspense lets you do. So it's really, really freaking cool.
And I think one of the like interesting thing about this is like this is a way to talk about Suspense that's different from how we've talked about in the past, where it's like the not making everything async.
Yes.
And reading components synchronously.
Exactly. So that's what I was going to say next is like it is a totally different angle, but it's fascinating about it is like once you go down a level of like the implementation details and how this solves this, it turns out like using this API to solve this one problem lets you get to this other world where you basically write synchronous code everywhere. Your async code becomes synchronous because when you hit an async part, it throws a promise and throws the rest of your code away. So by the time your components down low are ready to actually render, the data's sitting there in cache, and you are back to calculator, you're back to counter, where you're going from top to bottom, which is like amazing because everyone knows, every JavaScript developer would prefer on a given day writing synchronous only code to writing asynchronous code. Because of how much easier it is to understand and follow. So that's pretty cool. It's almost like that how that happens to be the way to do it is like, oh, as a side effect, like as a bonus, you get to eliminate async code. But also we've established the encapsulation of your hardest components that you've ever written.
But that doesn't this is going to sound weird. That doesn't seem like an accident to me.
Well, I guess it's not.
It feels like there's something higher level here that, I don't know, maybe we're missing. Or maybe this is like the whole like algebraic
It feels like you could solve
thing.
this problem in another way that doesn't change the model so much, in a sense, where you could have basically the use queries we have today. And yeah, I mean, I guess they don't. I guess that is the point. You have to kill the function somehow. You have to kill the child components. You literally kill them and throw them away and stop running the function. And it just so happens that eliminates like asynchronous code.
Yeah, you throw the promise.
You don't leave them running, and then have the parent like hide them. Something like that. We've all done things like that where it's like the children aren't ready yet. Let's like register a count of how many. We've had like this before where like dynamic form list or something. You don't know how many there are. Every time you render a component on did insert element, did render, let me know that I'm working, increment a counter. Okay, there's 3 components that are fetching, decrement them once they're ready, and now you can display everything. There's other ways to solve this problem. But the fact that it eliminates like async code basically from like these async components is pretty cool. I don't know. Maybe it's the same. Maybe it's the same thing, but I think it's like you said. It's another way to think about explaining it, but it's not as. I like the way that the story they told here and what we've been talking about, because it really gets at the problem that the programmer runs into, which is, for one reason or another, I've had to hoist data loading. It's not for one reason or another. It's literally for the loading state. That is the important nut here. Is that It's because these components have loading states as to why you've hoisted it in the first place. Whether you've put your big GraphQL query above it. I have this in my fitness app right now. It's like you have all these components, like you have the user rings up top, you have the exercises, but you just want to show, you want to show a loading spinner. So you have all these things, you pull them up, and then you pass them down. And then you're sitting there working on the user ring, and you're like, oh, it'd be nice to know like the total events from last week. You have to go back up, add it to the root query, and now you get it down here. And it's like all that stuff goes away. So that's so like much that easier. Is so the nugget. That is the kernel. That's like the pain point that I think is going to resonate most with the day-to-day app developers, because that's the thing that's causing them to split up their code. Pretty cool.
So you get all, like, end of the day, what do you get? You get encapsulated code, but the parent gets to control the loading state.
Yeah.
That's
and I think it maybe is not as been clear to us as we've been working as like that the root problem here is the loading state, which has caused the fragmentation of our nice encapsulated components. It's because they fetch data that we've had to break the encapsulation. It's because there's this indeterminate intermediate loading state. That is the problem. And so with Suspense, because you throw a promise whenever a component is loading, now you've managed to disentangle loading from what data you need to read. So you throw the promise, Suspense waits for it to fulfill, throws it in a cache, and you try it again. And now this guy's just reading data from a cache, and he can change which data he needs. But the loading is you literally
detangle the two,
pull them apart. It's so cool.
Which is cool. I still think it's so mind bending to use query, but not think of data.
Yeah.
And is loading.
It's literally use data. That's why.
Yeah.
It's not use query.
It's use
because
data.
You don't care that it's a network query. You don't even want to think about it like that anymore. It's like you're using data that's there for you.
Yep.
It's really cool.
I think one thing here, like maybe in the past episodes when we talked about Suspense, we would say things like, oh, it helps you like coordinate loading state. Like you don't have to show 6 loading spinners.
Yeah.
You can just hoist that up. But it's really like that's missing the point.
Yeah.
That it's what are you hoisting up?
Yes.
Just the is loading flag and nothing else.
Yeah.
So everything else stays in the component and the is loading moves up. Still, I mean, I'm still like my mind
chewing on it. I know.
I'm just blown by like I just can't imagine writing like a use query without data comma is data comma loading, data comma loading comma error. Like, that's just in every use query I write.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's like you were talking earlier about like the Ruby code, the async Ruby code I write is so freaking easy. Let file equals read file from system.
Sync. Yeah, it's just not async. It's
right, but it is sync. But it is async. It's sync, but it takes time. But you don't care.
As a developer,
exactly. The programming language has hidden the fact that these things take time from the concern of the programmer.
Yeah, I'm sure. There's events from the file system, but I don't care or know about any of that.
So now we're able to do the same thing with JavaScript UI, which is like, I need to get this data. I want this data. And then I want to show this if there's no messages or this if there's 10. And while it's happening, like in a Ruby process, it's just going to do it as fast as it can. In UI, while it's happening, you always want to keep your UIs responsive. So you want to show something, but turns out you want the parent to be able to do that because there's lots of these little components that can have data requirements. And so now you have, again, a way to do that. But like once you're within that data fetching component, it's going to go to being as simple as like your Ruby code, which you were saying earlier was like so easy compared to the async code we write in JavaScript. Obviously, it is super easy.
This is another
It's like using await everywhere. It's like having an async function where you await everything, which makes it extremely easy to write without any of the pitfalls of it. Await, when you're writing a test, and of course, we use freaking Cypress, which doesn't use await, but that's separate. Let's imagine we use a test framework that use async await, like the test we used to write in Ember. You say load the route, await, load the route, await, click this, await, click the save button. That's extremely easy to understand. You're writing a series of steps. You don't care that they take a long time. We've talked about this before because you as a test author don't care about what happens in between those steps. If you're able to You care about what happens in between fetching data and setting the data that you fetch because you want to show some feedback to the user. But now that you can delegate it to the parent, you can keep this beautiful little world within the component where it goes back to not caring about it because it's not not my problem. It's the parent's problem.
And I'm reading this as just,
let a series of steps.
Use data, let first name equals data dot first user dot first name, whatever.
Visible messages equals filter them, all that fun stuff that you want to do. It's really cool. It's really, really cool. So that's all not going to be in React 18, sadly. React 18 is not 18.0. Okay. React 18 is in a release candidate right now. It moved from alpha to beta. I've been using it on a project, and I've been using SWR in suspense mode, which has been a blast. And I hope to make a video about it really soon, just as a little bit, but a little kind of intro touching the main ideas we just talked about. But 18 is coming out. It's in a release candidate, so they want people to try it out in their apps and see if they run into anything. But the only officially supported way to use Suspense right now is to load with React.lazy to load code from the server for a component. We've never done that. I mean, we don't. It's just not really that necessary for like a side project, I guess. But
also
data fetching stuff is the main.
That's Next.js's problem.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not my problem.
That's true. So React for Suspense for data fetching, which is what we've just been talking about. Needs a little bit more work, I think, on the cache part of the React implementation. But I think they said it's going to be hopefully coming out like early next year. Like a minor release, like 18.1 or 18.2 or something like that.
So setting aside the cache, when React 18 comes out, I can still write a component that throws a promise.
You can do that today.
I can do that today.
You can do that in React. I think maybe even React 17.
Okay.
I mean, if you create a brand new Next app right now and add SWR, you can use SWR with Suspense True. Okay. And it's the way it does it is throwing a promise.
I thought there was something you ran into with like 17, 18 where like the children render differently.
Yeah. So Suspense has changed between 17 and 18, like in 17 or in some versions of 17. the effects of a parent would still run even if the children were suspending.
Okay.
And in 18, they changed that so that effects only run after all of the children are not suspending anymore, which makes a ton of sense.
Yep.
So if you're going to play with this today, I would just get on 18 beta.
Okay,
sure.
that was going to be my next question.
100%, I would do that.
Cool.
It's almost like suspend. I don't know if suspense is like the best word. I'm just thinking out loud. Like it makes sense, but it's
because you're still running.
Exactly.
You're still running the children. Well, I guess you're running the throne prom.
It makes sense. You're the app is you've suspended the subtree of components. It's really like the loading thing is like too familiar. It's like too loaded.
It's like waiting or something. It's like
it's too loaded. It's like loading is just another state of the UI. No, it's like it's indeterminate. It's like
it depends on.
It's
the context.
not ready.
I'm convinced.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna chew that one over. Man, I'm so tan, right? From Brazil. I'm Brazilian now. We were all like, I hope we die and come back Brazilian. Those people are so much fun, man. Oh. Anyways, yeah, pretty cool stuff. So, the other thing we just watched was the memo stuff, which is pretty neat. But I haven't seen much else from the React Conf. The suspense stuff is definitely like the biggest one for me.
Yeah, the memo one I thought that was cool.
It's pretty cool.
Compile timing away, use memo, use callback, and our personal view is that those tend to get pre-optimization, over optimization. So,
that's another good one to watch for sure. But yeah, man, what are we gonna be doing next year? I guess it's the middle of December. But next year we have to talk about what we want to do.
What is this
just
like?
Putting you on the spot. Yeah, it's our Q1 goal. Yeah. I'm just in a reflective mood. It's the end of the year. We've been taking a little time off. It's nice.
I think this year podcast wasn't a priority.
Yeah,
and I think next year it's going to be for us. So we're going to commit to weekly podcasts.
Yeah,
maybe get a little studio set up here.
Yeah. I think it'll be nice to not. It was weird last year. Just we moved our WeWorks got moved.
We were in 3 different offices.
Yeah, I'm exhausted thinking about it. I'm hoping I don't get kicked out of here.
I had a kid, so it's hard for me to come in. It's just like all this.
It's just true. Yeah, we should give ourselves a break. Cut ourselves some slack. We just go get a drink. And let's not worry about last year. How about that? No, just kidding. But we miss being on the mics for sure. I find this very energizing, and it's fun to we always get some conversation going about it. So hopefully now that we're landed here and we're starting to get this office set up, it's going to be easy to do this more regularly. And your kid's getting older, so it's supposed to get easier as they get older, right?
Yeah. I think I got a couple more years for that. 18 maybe.
Cool. Should we wrap it?
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that was fun. If you want us to hear anything else. Oh, I know some people are talking about like Remix. Remix also came out.
Yeah.
Remix is open source. Tailwind 3 is out. React 18 is about to be out. Pretty nice.
There's a lot.
Other people have been working. I've been on the beach sipping margaritas. I'm glad to see other people have been working.
I would like to.
It would be fun to play around with Remix.
I would like to play with Remix. Yeah. It's funny. I am feeling like just there's so much that we have to mess with. So yeah, but I would like to
try
play
it out.
With it, better understand it.
Yep.
The I don't know, the reaction to it on Twitter has just been
really,
awesome.
really good.
Yeah, just awesome. Like people super pumped, super excited to use it, and you like love to see that stuff. Like I don't know, I think that's just so good for React.
It's great
and UI development.
Dude, also, Sebastian got hired by Vercel.
Yeah, also
pretty crazy.
On that, it almost feels like I don't know. This is just like my take, but like that React is moving more towards like, okay, we're ready to go into like that next level where like we're not going to be like
the layer of abstraction up.
Yeah, we're not going to be like developers like us. We're going to be using React and we're going to understand React, but we're not going to be like creating our own React apps. We're going to be using Remix or Next. And if I love that. I love
good.
That.
Yeah, it's very good.
Even something like Gatsby, which we don't use. We use Next, but like just it's awesome that kind of everyone's on that level.
I know. It takes a long time though. I mean, there was some talking around the monoliths and the Rails stuff. I was thinking it would be interesting to like make a app with our stack. Like this would be a cool YouTube video, just starting a brand new app, maybe with the user login or maybe just with persistence, and just literally showing every screen that you have to click through to get Hasura open, and just seeing what it's like to get a full stack app. Because when Next says it's like full stack, most people use services for persistence. Most people use services for authentication.
Yeah.
So if you want to get the equivalent of like a Hello World app in Rails or Laravel that has those things in it, how long that would take versus how long it would take, including the signing up for Firebase or Hasura or whatever it was, and wiring it up. It's that stuff. But I think it would still be good and instructional to know, and to know what the pain points are. And I hope that the vision you're talking about, where like we're not at that low level, and certainly not configuring Webpack to like minify and like turn our ES6 into ES5 or whatever anymore. Like we're way beyond that, which is nice. Not writing like node build. I haven't wrote node build scripts in like forever.
But I think
it's like it needs to go to the next part too, where it's more like you plug in the auth and you plug in that stuff. And right now it's not that easy to do that.
It's not there. I do think though, like we're well past the Webpack stuff, and I do think we're even past, or at least this last since Remix. In the last 2 weeks. No, but it feels like there's just general acceptance, and like you're not going to pick a router anymore.
Yes.
There's not going to, you're not going to like, routing is just something you expect from the tool you're using. And I think that's really, obviously, that's a huge positive.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed all around. Cool. All right, let's actually wrap it this time. That was a lot. There's a lot to talk about. But yeah, if you have anything you want us to hear about, let us know. Front End First FM on Twitter. And I'm Sam, by the way. If this is your first time, we're going to get better about this, introducing ourselves. But we are two friends who work together and like to talk about front-end web development, React mostly these days, but other stuff too. I'm Sam.
I'm Ryan.
And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.